the day Harvard's legal titan was publicly executed on live television. Alan Dershowitz thought his Ivy League credentials would be enough to humiliate Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett by mocking her regional law degree. Instead, she delivered the most devastating legal takedown in television history, exposing not just his hypocrisy, but the entire legal establishment's blind spot. If you believe expertise should be measured by substance, not status, hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to witness will change how America thinks about power and privilege forever. The CNN studio lights blazed as two legal titans faced off in what would become the most explosive political confrontation of the year. On one side sat Alan Dershowitz, 85 years old, Harvard Law School professor emeritus, defender of celebrities and controversial figures for over 5 decades. His gray suit perfectly pressed, his confidence radiating like he owned the room. On the other side, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, civil rights attorney turned Texas representative. Her purple blazer crisp, her eyes sharp and ready for battle. But this wasn't going to be a polite legal discussion. Within minutes, Dershowitz would launch an attack that stunned the audience, questioning not just Crockett's legal knowledge, but her very credentials. He thought his Harvard pedigree would intimidate this young congresswoman from Dallas. He was dead wrong. Alan just made a mistake that's about to destroy his reputation, whispered one legal expert watching from the green room. He has no idea what Jasmine Crockett is capable of. The confrontation that followed would go viral in minutes, reshaping how America sees both legal elitism and the new generation of Black women leaders. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because you're about to witness legal history being made. For over half a century, Alan Dershowitz has been the face of elite American legal education. Harvard Law School professor, author of dozens of books, defender of O.J. Simpson, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. His resume reads like a who's who of controversial, high-profile cases. At 85, he's used to being the smartest person in any room, the authority everyone defers to. Dershowitz built his career on constitutional law, civil liberties, and an unshakable belief in his own intellectual superiority. He's appeared on every major news program, written op-eds for every major newspaper, and commanded respect, or at least attention, from the legal establishment for decades. But lately, Dershowitz has been struggling. His association with Jeffrey Epstein damaged his reputation. His defense of Trump alienated many former allies. Some younger lawyers openly question whether his time has passed, whether his views represent an outdated establishment that needs to change. Still, he carries himself with the arrogance of someone who believes his Harvard pedigree makes him untouchable. Jasmine Crockett represents everything the old legal establishment fears and doesn't understand. Born and raised in St. Louis, she worked her way through college and law school without the privilege and connections that define elite legal circles. She earned her law degree from University of Houston Law Center, not an Ivy League school, but a respected institution that produces lawyers who actually work for real people. Before entering Congress, Crockett built her reputation as a civil rights attorney in Dallas, taking on police brutality cases, fighting for voting rights, and representing clients who couldn't afford fancy law firms. When she arrived in Congress in 2023, Crockett quickly became known for her sharp questioning during committee hearings, her ability to cut through political nonsense with legal precision, and her refusal to be intimidated by anyone, regardless of their reputation or pedigree. She's part of a new generation of Black women leaders who combine legal expertise with political savvy and aren't afraid to challenge the establishment. But tonight on CNN, she was walking into Dershowitz's territory, a nationally televised legal discussion where academic credentials and institutional respect traditionally matter more than real-world experience. If you're tired of seeing qualified professionals dismissed because they don't have the right credentials, smash that like button right now. What's about to happen will change how we think about expertise forever. The CNN segment started innocently enough. Host Anderson Cooper had invited both legal experts to discuss the latest developments in Trump's federal election interference case. It seemed like a routine panel discussion, the kind both Dershowitz and Crockett had done hundreds of times before. Let's start with the constitutional questions surrounding executive privilege, Cooper began, looking between his two guests. Professor Dershowitz, you've written extensively about presidential powers. Dershowitz leaned forward, settling into his comfort zone. Anderson, this is exactly the kind of complex constitutional issue that requires deep academic understanding of founding principles and decades of constitutional scholarship. The courts need to understand the historical precedent, not just react to political pressure. His tone was professorial, condescending in the way that academic experts often sound when they assume they're talking to people who couldn't possibly understand the complexity of their field. Crockett listened quietly, taking notes, her expression neutral but focused. She'd heard this kind of academic pontificating before, and she knew exactly where it was heading. Congresswoman Crockett, Cooper continued, you've been vocal about accountability in this case. What's your perspective on the constitutional questions? Thank you, Anderson, Crockett began, her voice crisp and professional. While constitutional scholarship is important, we can't ignore the practical reality of what happened. The evidence shows a clear pattern of behavior that violated both constitutional principles and federal law. The question isn't whether the presidency deserves respect, it's whether anyone, including presidents, can be above the law. Her answer was direct, grounded in facts, and spoke to the real-world implications of the legal questions. She didn't use unnecessary jargon or academic terminology. She spoke like a lawyer who'd actually practiced law, not just studied it. Dershowitz's expression shifted slightly. He'd expected deference to his expertise, not a confident alternative perspective. His response revealed the first hint of condescension that would eventually explode into open disrespect. Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate your political perspective, but constitutional law requires a more nuanced understanding than what we typically see in congressional hearings. These are complex legal principles that take years of study to fully grasp. The comment hung in the air like a slap. He had just implied that Crockett's understanding was superficial, that her political position somehow disqualified her from a serious legal analysis. It was the kind of dismissive comment that women and people of color hear constantly in professional settings, the suggestion that their expertise isn't quite real or sufficient. Crockett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. Professor, I think you might be surprised by how much constitutional law Congress people actually need to understand. We take an oath to defend the Constitution, and many of us take that responsibility very seriously. Of course, Dershowitz replied, waving his hand dismissively. But there's a difference between political understanding and true legal scholarship. The kind of deep constitutional analysis this case requires comes from academic training and decades of serious study. Cooper tried to move the discussion forward, asking about specific legal precedents, but Dershowitz couldn't let go of his need to establish intellectual dominance. When Crockett offered a detailed analysis of relevant case law, citing specific decisions and their implications, Dershowitz made the mistake that would define the rest of the evening. Congresswoman, you're citing cases, which is fine, but do you have the legal training to really understand their constitutional significance? I mean, where did you study law? The question was asked with a slight smile, the kind of academic condescension that says, I already know the answer won't impress me. He was setting up what he thought would be an easy way to establish his superiority, the classic elite lawyer move of credential checking to dismiss someone's arguments without addressing their substance. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you came from or where you studied, give this video a thumbs up right now. What happens next will be the most satisfying moment you'll see all year. Crockett paused for just a moment, recognizing exactly what was happening. She'd been in this situation before. The moment when someone with an elite pedigree tries to use their educational credentials to dismiss her expertise. Usually it happened in private meetings or depositions. This time it was happening on national television. I studied at University of Houston Law Center, she replied evenly. Not Harvard, if that's what you're getting at. Dershowitz's smile widened. Ah, well, that explains the difference in our analytical approaches. Houston is a fine regional school, I'm sure. But constitutional law at this level really requires the kind of rigorous training you get at top-tier institutions, Harvard, Yale, places that truly prepare lawyers for complex constitutional questions. The CNN studio went very quiet. Cooper looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that his guest had just crossed a line from academic disagreement into personal attack. The production crew, visible in the background, stopped what they were doing. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was happening. "Professor Dershowitz," Crockett said, her voice still calm, but with a new edge. "Are you suggesting that lawyers from non-Ivy League schools are incapable of understanding constitutional law?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Dershowitz replied, still confident he held the upper hand. "I'm stating a fact about the difference in training and preparation. Constitutional scholarship requires a certain level of academic rigor that, frankly, most regional law schools simply can't provide." Crockett leaned back in her chair, and anyone who knew her well would have recognized the look in her eyes. She was no longer just responding to academic condescension. She was preparing to systematically dismantle it. "That's interesting, Professor. So you believe that where someone went to law school determines their ability to understand and apply constitutional principles?" "Experience matters, Congresswoman. Academic pedigree matters. The quality of legal education matters. These aren't controversial statements. They're simply reality." Dershowitz was doubling down, apparently unaware that he was walking into a trap. His confidence was absolute, his belief in his intellectual superiority unshakable. He thought he was educating a younger colleague about the realities of legal hierarchy. Instead, he was about to learn a lesson that would humiliate him in front of millions of viewers and legal experts across the country. "Well then, Professor," Crockett said, her voice taking on a tone that made Cooper sit up straighter. "Let's test that theory." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The CNN studio, already quiet, became absolutely silent. Legal experts watching from law firms and law schools across America leaned forward in their chairs. Social media started buzzing as viewers sensed something big was about to happen. Dershowitz, still confident in his superiority, smiled and nodded. "By all means, Congresswoman, I'm always happy to engage in serious legal discussion." He had no idea that he'd just agreed to his own professional destruction on live television. "Professor Dershowitz," Crockett began, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had spent years in actual courtrooms. "Since you believe academic pedigree determines constitutional understanding, let's discuss the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and its application to executive accountability." She paused, looking directly at him. "You've argued in several recent interviews that presidential immunity should be broadly interpreted. But doesn't that position directly contradict the Supreme Court's holding in Nixon versus Fitzgerald? Specifically, the court's distinction between civil and criminal liability for presidential actions." Dershowitz shifted in his chair. The question was precise, sophisticated, and referenced a complex legal distinction that required deep understanding of both constitutional law and Supreme Court precedent. This wasn't the kind of surface-level political talking point he'd expected from a regional law school graduate. "Well, Nixon versus Fitzgerald dealt specifically with civil suit," he replied, trying to regain his footing. "The constitutional questions surrounding criminal prosecution are quite different." "Exactly," Crockett said, her eyes lighting up. "Which brings us to the even more relevant precedent in Clinton versus Jones, where the court specifically rejected broad claims of presidential immunity from judicial process. The court held that the president is not above the law, even while in office." She continued without pause, building her argument like the experienced litigator she was. "But let's go deeper, since you value rigorous analysis. The court in Clinton relied heavily on Youngstown's Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer. Justice Jackson's concurrence, establishing the framework for executive power analysis. Are you familiar with Justice Jackson's 3 categories of presidential authority?" Dershowitz nodded, but his confident smile was fading. Crockett was demonstrating a command of constitutional law that went far beyond what he'd expected. She wasn't just citing cases. She was building a sophisticated legal argument in real time. "Good," Crockett continued. "Then you'll recognize that under Justice Jackson's framework, when a president acts without constitutional or statutory authorization, as the evidence suggests happened in this case, presidential power is at its lowest ebb." The court's language was clear. Presidential claims to constitutional power are subject to the most rigorous judicial scrutiny in such circumstances. Now, Professor, here's where my regional law school education and actual courtroom experience might be relevant, Crockett said, her tone sharpening. I've litigated constitutional cases involving government accountability. I've argued in front of federal judges about executive overreach. I've seen how these principles apply when real people's rights are violated by government officials who think they're above the law. If you're enjoying watching real expertise triumph over arrogance, hit that like button right now. We're just getting to the most devastating part. She leaned forward, her voice gaining intensity. You can study constitutional theory from Cambridge all you want, but until you've stood in a federal courtroom and argued that a police chief or a mayor or a government official can't hide behind qualified immunity when they violate constitutional rights, you don't really understand what accountability means. Dershowitz tried to interrupt, but Crockett was just getting started. I've represented clients whose voting rights were violated by officials who claimed they were just following orders. I've fought cases where government officials argued they couldn't be held accountable because of their positions. And you know what I learned? The Constitution doesn't care about your title or your position or your academic credentials. It cares about your actions. But let's talk about your record, Professor, since you seem to think credentials determine credibility, Crockett said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had done her homework. You've spent considerable time defending wealthy and powerful clients who use their positions to avoid accountability. Jeffrey Epstein, for instance. The CNN studio went dead silent. Cooper's eyes widened. Legal experts watching from around the country felt their breath catch. Crockett had just turned Dershowitz's credential attack back on him, but with devastating precision. You used your Harvard expertise to argue that a man who sexually abused minors deserved lenient treatment. You crafted legal arguments to help him avoid full accountability for heinous crimes. So tell me, Professor, what does that say about the rigorous academic training you're so proud of? Dershowitz's face went red. That's completely unfair. I was providing constitutional representation. Were you? Crockett interrupted, her prosecutorial training showing. Or were you using your elite credentials and academic reputation to help a wealthy predator escape justice? Because from where I sit, from my regional law school perspective, it looks like you used your Harvard pedigree to legitimize representing someone who deserved the full force of the law. Here's what's really interesting, Professor, Crockett continued, now in full control of the conversation. You want to talk about constitutional scholarship. Let's talk about your recent arguments regarding presidential power. You've argued that President Trump's actions were protected by executive privilege, but your own previous scholarship contradicts that position. She pulled out a tablet, clearly prepared for this moment. In your 1982 article, Executive Privilege, a Constitutional Myth, you wrote, and I quote, "No president should be permitted to hide behind claims of executive privilege when evidence exists of potential criminal conduct. The Constitution demands accountability, not immunity." Dershowitz's mouth opened slightly. She had done something he clearly hadn't expected. She'd researched his own academic work and found the contradictions in his positions. So either you were wrong in 1982 or you're wrong now. Either way, your rigorous Harvard training seems to have led you to completely contradictory constitutional conclusions depending on which president you're defending. The CNN studio was absolutely silent except for the hum of cameras. Cooper looked stunned. Legal experts watching from around the country were frantically taking notes, realizing they were witnessing a complete dismantling of one legal legend by another. Dershowitz tried to respond, his voice shaky. Constitutional interpretation evolves. No, Professor, Crockett said firmly. Constitutional principles don't change based on who's paying your legal fees or which political party holds the White House. That's exactly the kind of unprincipled approach that my regional law school education taught me to recognize and reject. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience with the confidence of someone who had just proven her point beyond any doubt. The Constitution isn't a Harvard seminar where abstract theories matter more than real consequences. It's a living document that protects real people from real abuses of power, and sometimes the lawyers who understand that best are the ones who learned law by practicing it, not just by reading about it. Within minutes of the CNN segment ending, the legal world exploded. What Jasmine Crockett had just done to Alan Dershowitz wasn't just a debate victory. It was a paradigm shift that would ripple through law schools, courtrooms, and political circles for years to come. The first tweet appeared less than 30 seconds after the segment ended. A law professor at Georgetown posted, "Did Jasmine Crockett just deliver the most devastating takedown in legal television history? That wasn't a debate. That was a masterclass." Within 5 minutes, Crockett destroys Dershowitz was trending on X, formerly Twitter. Legal professionals, law students, and political observers were sharing clips faster than CNN's social media team could upload them. The most viral moment, when Crockett quoted Dershowitz's own 1982 article back to him. That 15-second clip would eventually be viewed over 2 million times in the first hour alone. Legal Eagle, a popular lawyer YouTuber with over 3 million followers, posted, "Holy, Jasmine Crockett just used Alan Dershowitz's own scholarship to expose his hypocrisy on live television. This is what happens when real trial lawyers meet academic blowhards." Law students across America began creating memes. The most popular showed Dershowitz's shocked face with the caption, "When you find out regional law schools actually teach constitutional law too." But the social media buzz was nothing compared to the earthquake happening in professional legal circles. Within an hour, legal blogs and professional publications were scrambling to analyze what had just happened. The Harvard Law Review's Twitter account posted a thread breaking down Crockett's constitutional arguments, confirming that every citation was accurate and every legal point was precisely stated. Several prominent legal scholars began publicly reconsidering their own assumptions about legal education and expertise. Professor Kimberly Crenshaw from UCLA Law tweeted, "What we just witnessed is why diversity in legal education matters. Different perspectives and experiences create better lawyers, not just different lawyers." Even some Harvard law professors began distancing themselves from Dershowitz's performance. Professor Lawrence Tribe, one of Harvard's most respected constitutional scholars, posted, "Legal expertise is demonstrated through reasoning and knowledge, not institutional pedigree." Tonight's CNN segment was a powerful reminder of that principle. The impact extended far beyond legal circles. Political operatives and commentators immediately recognized that something significant had shifted in how expertise and authority would be perceived in American public discourse. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a statement praising Crockett's masterful demonstration of legal expertise and principled advocacy, noting that her performance exemplifies the kind of rigorous preparation and constitutional knowledge that Americans deserve from their elected representatives. Perhaps most surprisingly, the confrontation began influencing law school applications and conversations almost immediately. The University of Houston Law Center, Crockett's alma mater, reported a 40% increase in website traffic within 24 hours, with many prospective students specifically mentioning the CNN segment in their inquiries. Several law schools announced new programs emphasizing practical constitutional advocacy and civil rights litigation, directly inspired by the public interest in Crockett's approach to legal education. The message was clear. Students wanted to learn law the way Crockett had learned it, with an emphasis on real-world application and principled advocacy. Beyond legal and political circles, the confrontation resonated with broader cultural conversations about expertise, authority, and respect in American society. Women's professional organizations hailed Crockett's performance as an example of how to respond to condescending behavior in workplace settings. The National Association of Women Lawyers posted, "Every woman who has ever been questioned about her qualifications instead of her arguments should watch this video." Civil rights organizations saw the exchange as validation of their arguments about diversity in professional spaces. The NAACP posted, "This is why representation matters. Different voices bring different strengths, and tonight, Jasmine Crockett showed the power of that principle." The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Alan Dershowitz will be remembered as a pivotal moment in American legal and political discourse. It marked the end of an era when elite credentials could silence diverse voices and the beginning of a new chapter where expertise is measured by performance, not pedigree. For viewers who witnessed this historic exchange, the message was clear. Never underestimate someone based on where they came from or where they went to school. Judge them by what they know, how they think, and what they stand for. And if you learned something from this incredible showdown, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Because in American politics and law, there are always more battles to be fought, more truth to be revealed, and more moments when the underdog proves that merit matters more than privilege. What did you think of Jasmine Crockett's performance? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to see what real legal expertise looks like in action.